Hello, everyone, and hello, Adam. I'm very honored
Hello,
to
Yoshiko.
hello. I'm very honored to interview you today as part of the Grand Multi Literacy event. So it's an event that brings information and resources to multilingual families. And with all you do for multilingual families, there is a lot. I really wanted to have you as part of the guests coming in. So Adam, so for those of you who don't know Adam Beck, so you're originally from the US and you have been living in Japan now for about 25 years. And
Yeah.
you and your wife, who is Japanese, are raising multilingual children. Multilingual children. You have a daughter who is 19 and a son who is 16 now.
Hmm.
And so during this interview, I would like to go back on how you raised your children, especially the multi-literate side. And we're going to be
Okay.
talking about some of your resources as well, because there are a lot. So you're the author of 5 books, including Maximize Your Child's Bilingual Ability, Bilingual Success Stories Around the World, and I Want to Be Bilingual, which looks like a children's book, but it's addressed to adults. So if you're
Hmm.
interested, can have a look at it. We put all the links in the description below, by the way. You have also co-authored with your son 4 books, including coloring books, wordless books, and you're also the founder of the blog Bilingual Monkeys, the forum Bilingual Zoo, and the private coaching program Bilingual SuperKids.
Hmm.
You have recently released a free on-demand webinar called How to Get Your Bilingual Child Eagerly Shouting Out in the Minority Language, literally. Uh,
Yes, yeah.
and you're now creating a masterclass that's going to be an online video course called How to Get Your Bilingual Child to Speak the Minority Language More Actively,
Mm.
which will be released in January, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, so you have done a lot. So welcome, Adam. Thank you very much for
Yoshiko,
being
thank
with
you
us.
so much for inviting me. I know we've been in touch, over the past couple of years, I think, but this is the
Yeah,
first time we're actually meeting
that's
face
true.
to
Yeah,
face, and
yeah.
I've been looking forward to it. So I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to discuss.
Thank you. It's the same, but I feel like we know each other because I've seen your videos already, and you've probably seen my videos. So it's
Right,
like
right,
it's the
right,
first time we actually meet. Yeah.
right, right, right.
So I would like to start with all your resources. So as I said, you have created a lot for multilingual families. But I was wondering what got you started into this because there are many families who are raising bilingual, multilingual children, but it doesn't mean that they do as much as you do or they do anything at all in terms of resources. So what got you started on this path?
Well, it feels like centuries ago, but I came to Japan, as you said, about 25 years ago, and I started teaching English as a second language at Hiroshima International School. So at the international school, I worked with hundreds of bilingual and multilingual kids from a variety of countries over the years. And so that was really my first experience where I got involved in the practical side of working with bilingual and multilingual children. And that's really my specialty, I think, is the practical real world experience of raising bilingual and multilingual children. So it started with teaching, and that continued for many years. And then at the same time, I did get married, and my wife is Japanese, and we had 2 children of our own.
Yeah.
And so I was determined, based on my experience as a teacher, to do the best I could in terms of raising them bilingually. And then we added Spanish along the way. But their main 2 languages are Japanese and English. And so that's where it began. And then, because of my experiences as a teacher and a parent, I was part of a teaching group locally and like a network within Japan. And I started sharing my experiences and ideas more locally And then I had some early experience blogging, just kind of a personal blog. But then
Okay.
I thought I was getting some positive feedback. And so I thought, well, I'll share some of these ideas more broadly. And that's when I started Bilingual Monkeys in 2012. It's more than 10 years ago. It's hard to believe. And then because that started to become pretty active, the audience was asking for a way that they could interact with each other more. I think this is really before Facebook groups and Instagram. There were other, back then there weren't so many opportunities for community, right? And so that's when I started the Bilingual Zoo Forum in 2014.
Okay.
And everything else really just grew out of that. I didn't really start with a grand ambition. I've always been a writer. That's just part of my life and part of who I am. And
Yeah.
so writing about my experiences came naturally to me. And then from the blog and forum, it grew into the books. And then I started doing personal coaching and then opened I guess I call it the culmination of my work with parents is really the private coaching program, Bilingual SuperKids, which
Yeah.
opened this year in January. And now I'm just moving onward to using more video and audio. And as you mentioned, I just released a free webinar
Mm.
and I'm working on my first online course. So again, I had no ambition at the beginning. I still have no real ambition, but I really just want to continue sharing my experiences and ideas with parents out in the world because I know personally how important um, this bilingual aim or multilingual aim is for families. And if I can be of some support to families out in the world, then I'll continue doing that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So
Yeah.
it's really like you saw a need, and then like depending on the technological advancement, you adapt it to different forms of sharing your experience and
Yeah,
expertise.
that's really right. I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way so much, but it's definitely true that, doing this for some time now, the world has changed around me and people don't, blogging is not the same thing it was 10 years ago. Things have really changed. And to be honest, I even got to the point, I think probably in the middle of last year, before I decided to move forward with this new coaching program, where I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just kind of retire from this area and continue writing in other ways because I also write fiction and I have other interests. But yeah, so I finally decided, well, there's probably more I can do. And I really, it's a really, I'm sure you feel the same, but to be able to support parents in such an important way, such a it's a fundamental sort of experience for parents and children and families to be able to realize the sort of success that they seek. And so if I can help them do that, even in a small way, and of course I can't help everyone and not everyone will, my work won't resonate with everyone, and that's understandable, but I'll continue doing what I can, I think, for as long as I can.
Thank you very much for carrying on.
Yeah,
And so we come back
thank you.
on your resources a bit later. But as I said before, you have two grown-up children now. So I would like to go back on your journey with them on multiliteracy.
Sure.
Um, so they are growing up in Japan. So obviously the Japanese is very good, like any Japanese person. But they have English as well, and I understand they can read and write really well. And I was wondering if you could share first the beginning of the journey. So how did it start? If you had any challenge and how you overcame them?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to provide some context, right, for their experience growing up, which was largely in Japanese because their mother is Japanese and her English ability is pretty low, and she didn't really want to use Japanese with them or within the family. So it was really up to me in terms of providing
Japanese or
exposure.
English?
Sorry?
You didn't want to use Japanese or English?
My wife didn't want to use English with,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
right. So my wife has only used Japanese with them, and they have only attended Japanese schools. It's true, I was a teacher at the international school for some time, but this is a separate issue. But based on that experience, we decided it would be best for them to go to Japanese schools, and for me and whatever I could do beyond me to support their English side in that way, right? So that's been the case throughout. And so they've had English in school, but the English level has been very low for the most part. And I can't say that their schooling has stretched their English very much at all. So in terms of literacy, I thought about this and I tried to boil it down into basically 5 things that I've done that has helped their literacy progress from the time they were born until now. And again, they are now, my daughter is 19 and my son is 16. So number 1 is lots of books. It isn't the case so much anymore because they're basically grown now. But when they were growing up, our bookshelves were just overflowing. You know, people that would come to the house would laugh because there was, you know, we don't live in a big space, but there was no room for anything. There were just too many books. But, you know, I was willing, and thankfully my wife was willing, to kind of put up with that because I knew it was extremely important for them to grow up in an environment that they would be immersed in books and literacy.
Yeah.
And a lot of this was in English because I really emphasized English books. And to the extent possible, I de-emphasized Japanese because they didn't really need further support in Japanese that way, right? So number 1 is lots
Definitely.
of books over the years.
Okay.
Number 2 is lots of reading aloud. I mean, I started from the time we brought them home from the hospital. I probably read to them in the hospital. I don't remember, but I definitely did. I can recall reading to my daughter when she was a baby on her back, and I was reading to her then, and that has been day by day, week by week, year by year, and month by month, and year by year over the years because I never stopped. So even now, they're older teenagers. When I do have the chance, and my reading aloud time with them has been mostly in the morning at breakfast. So even now, my daughter is, she's having a gap year now, so she doesn't get up for school in the same way, but my son does. And so at 7 o'clock, I know that he's going to be sitting down at breakfast, and I'm going to be reading some news articles to him now. In the past, of course, it was chapter books, children's literature, then young adult literature, things like that. But I've read to them throughout their childhood. And let me just say that I really do stress to parents that even when the child becomes capable of reading on their own, that they should really continue reading to them daily, because that can do so much to advance their language and literacy level. Because
Yeah.
of course, you know, we children can understand at a higher level than they can actually read. And that's true pretty much throughout the childhood years. So that was number 2, lots of reading aloud.
And I guess as well, when we read aloud, we have this direct connection. So first for the parent-child bond, but also for them, when they don't understand the word, they can ask straight away. If they're on
Yeah,
their own reading, it's okay, I don't understand this word. It might mean this, but it's not clarified at that time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. All of that is true. And so there are so many benefits to reading aloud, and not just literacy, but as you mentioned, which is really important, and maybe the number 1 thing that we've gotten out of this whole experience is the fact that it has the the additional effort that it has taken for me to support their growing bilingual ability is the fact that I spent so much more time with them, I think, than I otherwise would have. So it really has enriched our relationship as parent and child. And even now as teenagers, knock on wood, I still have a close relationship with both of them. So I think that has a lot to do with it, right? So number one was lots of books. Two was lots of reading aloud. Number three was really more of a transitional stage, but there was a time when I was doing some more direct teaching in terms of their early reading ability with some phonics readers. So I got a set of really engaging phonics books with some cute stories and illustrations. And it really helped, I think, serve as a bridge from their own growing development just through the amount of exposure that they received from books, from me and from picking up books on their own. So I think whole language really does have a lot to do with a child's growing reading ability. But I'm not just like whole language or phonics. I really do think both have their place. And I did bring in some phonics readers to help with this transition from when they were starting to decode words and recognize sight words. And then they could start to read, whole little books on their own, and then move into picture books and, easier types of chapter books and things like that. So that was a fairly short stage, and I would say they were probably about 3 years old at that time. And then another thing I did, I guess from about the age of 3 was, this is number 4, the daily homework routine, where I really did establish this because I knew that I just didn't think it would be possible to move them as far along as I thought they could go if we weren't doing something in a structured way day by day. So what I did was, from about the age of 3, I just wanted to implement a daily homework routine that was manageable for them, that was, a gentle way to, let's say, establish a sort of teeth brushing habit with literacy from day to day. And because I did that early on, it wasn't like there was never pushback, because there was as time went on, because they had homework from school, they had Japanese homework. And on top of that, I was asking them to do 10, 15, 20 minutes of English homework. But I remained firm about that, and I was able to sustain that. And I've done it even up to today, where I continue to feed them, young adult literature, other kinds of nonfiction reading material, and, asking them to write in a journal, things like that. But, from age 3 to age 18, 19, this has been an incremental progress, which has helped raise their level over time to get to this higher level where they are right now. And so daily homework has been a really important part of it throughout. And the last thing, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I like the fact that you said it was manageable. You gave them something that was manageable, because there will be pushbacks, but if we give a little bit, it's less likely that they're going to push back too much. And like what you said, 10, 15, 20 minutes is not that much. Like every day, 10 minutes, in a week, you have an hour done or more. But so, and that adds up over time.
It really does. That's the whole thing. It's the fact that all these small steps from day to day, if you're going to run a marathon, you may not necessarily even need to run. You just take your baby steps day by day, and you'll complete your marathon eventually, right? So it's kind of like that. And I just wanted to add something and it's something I suggest to parents as well, is that to maintain these kinds of routines, it sometimes can be helpful to create a framework of incentive, some kind of rewards, for example. I'm not big on rewards, and I never gave like cash back if you complete this workbook, but I did do something like, I remember very clearly when my son was young, he really liked Pokemon, that it was a big thing at the time.
My sons love it
And
as well.
yeah, I was able to go to like a recycle shop and find a lot of small plastic Pokemon figures. And so I bought a bunch I probably bought them all. And I put them all like in a big plastic container. And he was reading these easy chapter books, and he was 5, 6, 7 years old. But when he completed a book, and it might take him a week or 2 weeks or so to complete a book, he could then choose one of these plastic Pokemon characters. And it was really motivating for him. It really was. So I think the idea of maintaining, it's like the carrot and the stick, and I didn't really have to pull out the stick very often, to be honest, because I tried to be,
Carrot instead.
yeah, I tried to use the carrots where I could. And in that way, by keeping the homework routine manageable and engaging where I could, asking them to write in a journal on, interesting or silly questions, these tasks were more engaging to the children. And on top of that, there was a framework for moving forward and then getting some kind of small reward, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's another important point. And yeah, so Yoshito, the last thing, and all of these things are working together throughout the years,
Yeah.
of course, is captive reading. So, but what I mean by captive reading is this strategy where I would try to get text in front of their eyes in various ways. And the main way I did it was because in Japan, we have these small bathrooms. They're basically just toilet rooms where there's just the toilet in like a closet. That's basically it. But it's a little different from house to house, but ours have always been pretty small. And I could post things starting with like a whiteboard in the bathroom, which was right next to the toilet or right in front of the toilet on the door, in fact. And so I would start with a whiteboard, and then I would end up putting pieces of paper on the wall. But what I did with this was very simple messages to begin and riddles. And then I would move into, with paper, I did something for a few years, which was really successful with my kids, which was serial stories, where I was writing these stories page by page, and each page ended with a cliffhanger. But the key part of this was I used the kids, they were the heroes of the story, right? And so they were the heroes. I used their names, and I was often like the bad guy, I was the villain, and we used locations that we're familiar with. But by personalizing the story for them in this way, they were so engaged, because who doesn't want to read something that has your name in it? You're just gonna have to read it and try to puzzle it out. So I would write these things, and I really knew it worked when they, we were in the middle of one of these 20, 30-part stories, page by page, and I would change the page every 2 or 3 days. And so I remember
So it's not even every day. They have to wait.
Sorry? Yeah, I
It's
know.
not every day. They have to
So
wait.
they could read it at least a couple times. And then I remember distinctly one time where I changed it, or I just added it. There would be page after page after page, so they could always go back. And then I went into the kitchen. I said, hey, guys, I just added the next part of the story. They ran into the bathroom to read it. They ran. I mean, what more do we want? That is engaging. And so, I encourage parents to try things like that, where they really can personalize the material for the children to engage them in that way. And that's just one idea. But anyway, that's captive reading. I've done it throughout childhood. I still do it. Now I print out news articles and I post them in the bathroom. And if something's there in the bathroom, we tend to read it. That's why there are advertisements in public restrooms, because our eyes fall upon it and we can't help ourselves. We read it.
I
So
remember I
yeah, go
remember
ahead.
reading, I think it was in one of your blog posts or a video, I can't remember, but when you said that one day your son came to you and he said, Dad, I can't help but reading. Like if there's something I have to read it. It's really,
Exactly. That's the like automatic reading response, which we all have once we become readers. If there's text within our eyes, if there's text in front of us, it's like hard not to read it. You know what I mean? And so we can take advantage of that with our kids. That's what captive reading is all about. And so my main venue for this was the bathroom, but I also did like during preschool and kindergarten, I would put notes in their lunchbox. And so I would prepare this in advance. And then when they had their lunch, they would pull it out and they'd open up their little note. It might just have a word when they were just first starting to recognize words. And then it moved into simple sentences and, things like that, and keeping it light, keeping it silly. But all of it adds up. And that's, again, the main point. The more we can do from all these different angles, the more we can generate momentum and progress over time.
yeah. And what you said as well is very important. Like it has to be small bits that adds up. We don't need to think I have to do this huge thing, but it's
Right.
just small things that we put here and there that we add up together, that we make them read more and more proficient. Yeah. And
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just what you said. And it needs to be manageable, not only for the kids, but for ourselves as parents, because we're busy too. I totally get it. I mean, I'm a parent. I know what it's like to raise children and have a job, and I get it. I've always described my life as like juggling all these different balls, and half of them are clunking me on the head and dropping on the ground. And then I have to pick them up again and I try again. And that's all fine because we can't be perfect at it. We just have to keep going from day to day and doing our honest best. But that's enough to really go a long, long way.
and I like this analogy you made about the juggling balls and some are going to fall on your head, but we have to be okay with knowing that some are going to fall. Not everything is going to work out, but
Yeah,
if we have enough balls in the air, it's going to carry on.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
And
yeah, that's the main message to parents is really don't worry too much. Just keep moving forward, do your best from day to day, and don't really overthink it. We do have to think strategically about our efforts and what will be most effective or what we think will be most effective, and then, continue tweaking them as we move forward. But don't
yeah,
overthink it if something's not working. Just go back and think, okay, what can I do differently next time? And
yeah,
then move forward again. Just keep, I wrote a blog post at one point about how parents should be more like zombies in a way, because zombies just keep moving forward. They don't overthink it. They just keep
yeah.
moving forward to get what they want. And we kind of need to do the same.
Yeah. And they move slowly as well. They don't need to be fast. You just need to
Yeah.
going.
They just need to keep going without giving up, right?
Yeah. And so from what you said, it was very important from the start. So from the time they were like three, you're starting to teaching them to read. Why has it been so important for you that your children could read and write in English as well, not just speak the language?
Well, because I think basically because the opportunity was here, and I didn't even really think consciously about, okay, yeah, I want them to be able to communicate in English, but reading and writing, that's, a bridge too far, something like that. I didn't really think about it. And of course, because compared to some other languages like Japanese, and I guess this is definitely one reason why we decided to do English at home. English has 26 letters in the alphabet, and I know maybe puzzling out some words and spelling can be tricky and all that, but it's not like Japanese or Chinese or other
I
languages when
agree.
there are thousands of characters. And school, in a way, was almost I don't want to say necessary, but almost necessary for them to develop, really advanced literacy ability in Japanese. And so there are other reasons, but that's one reason. And so I knew it was possible that I could really emphasize all four skills. And so the opportunity was there, and I was going to take it on and do what I could, knowing that I didn't necessarily have, and this is an important point, I didn't necessarily have a specific goal in terms of I want them to be at this particular level by the time they turned 18. I can't necessarily say that, nor do I really recommend that to parents. What I do recommend is just do what you can day by day throughout the years of childhood and just go as far as you can together. I think that's the best goal we can have.
Yeah, thank you. So now that we've spoken about your children, I want to go back on your books, but especially the books you co-authored with your son. So first, maybe if you could explain what they are, but also I would like to know where the idea came from. Is it an idea from you thinking, okay, I want to write that kind of book, and your son was interested, he came in, or was it you talked about it together and you created together? Yeah. So
Yeah,
so
well, it's a
first,
really good question. It's a kind of an interesting backstory, perhaps, but what happened was before the pandemic started in early 2020, right?
yeah.
We got a pet, and what we got was a kind of lizard called a bearded dragon. And our first bearded dragon was named FIFA. She was a female lizard. And the interesting thing about these kinds of lizards, they're very gentle, very sweet creatures, really. They don't necessarily do a lot, especially when they're in their tank. And so what she often did was just sitting on a rock, like a basking rock, because they're originally from Australia and they like sun,
Yeah.
they like warmth, they like heat. So she had a basking light, like a heat lamp, and she would sit there and just kind of, I guess we could say she just sat there thoughtfully and looked off into the distance, but it was probably more she, sat there blankly. I don't know exactly what was going on in her mind, but that's the interesting part of the story, because my son and I had fun with this by thinking, what is she daydreaming about? What could she be daydreaming about? And so we made up these kind of jokes like, oh, she's thinking she's, on the roller coaster with us. She's at the amusement park. She's eating, cotton candy, or she's an astronaut, so we had all these various scenarios for her. And I thought at one point, because we were joking like this, I really thought it would make a fun and funny book. But, as kids get older, and this is another issue, but we have less time with them. And so I never really thought seriously about pursuing this as a project. But when the pandemic began and the schools closed, my kids were home for several months. And then I realized I suddenly had a lot more time with them.
And that's true.
And it was really a blessing in that way, at least. And I thought we can do this. I had a friend who was an illustrator, and I said, let's make this book. Let's make this Bearded Dragon Daydreams coloring book. And that's what we did. And so we started with that as the first project. And these things took many months, each book project, but it turned out so well. It was really fun. And when I put it out there in the world, there was a lot of positive feedback. And then we moved on and we created 2 more coloring books. The next one was another Bearded Dragon book. It was Bearded Dragon Fairy Tales. It was like not the gingerbread man, it was like the ginger beard man, because it's bearded dragons, right? Goldilocks and the 3, not bears, the 3 beardies. So that was what that book was about. And then we also did something different. I thought, well, let's do a more like popular animal, cats. And so we did Cat Dreams, which was kind of like cats sleeping and what they're dreaming about, and trying to have that same sort of humorous contrast. And so we did these 3 coloring books and put those out. And then finally, there was still some time, and we moved into a wordless picture book. I love wordless picture books. We could probably talk an hour about those, because those are kind of one of my secret weapons for exposure and engagement. But I wanted to create one. And so we created the book, again, with the same illustrator, Bearded Dragon Home Alone, which is basically the story of the bearded dragon once no one is home, and the people leave the home, and he climbs out of his tank and he gets into all this mischief. But before everybody comes back home, he cleans it all up and gets back in his tank and just sits on his rock, So that's what that book is about. And all the books, I put them out on Amazon, and they've all done well. The cat book hasn't done that well. I don't really have a cat audience, I get. But anyway, the books have done really well, and that's nice, and they've been helpful also. Particularly the wordless picture book has been helpful to bilingual families, because they can share the story with their kids in any language. There's no text. That's one of the value of a wordless picture book. One of the things you can do with it.
And with wordless pictures, I have also used them to engage my sons into writing and reading by adding myself some
Yes.
bubbles, so it can be used as well that way.
Yeah. And even I would just add on to that even with older kids, it's true that picture books for kids, they tend to outgrow them over time, and they move into chapter books and then middle grade fiction and young adult literature, things like that. But a wordless picture book can be used in so many flexible ways, not only for telling the story with the child or to the child initially, and then having the child tell the story, or you tell the story together in different ways, but even as kids get older with students, and even with my own kids as teenagers, I can give them a wordless picture book and I can say, write out the story. There's a lot you can do with these books for many, many years. And so anyway, getting back to the whole arc of this experience with my son. So all of this, this went on for a couple years, I would say, these 4 book projects. But the value of that, beyond just, the books we were creating, which could be of benefit to others out in the world as well. But what's really important to me is engaging with kids, not only in our regular ongoing efforts, our habits and routines. That's really the engine that's driving everything forward. But on top of that, when we have time to pursue creative projects with our kids, like a book project, or like making a video, or there's plenty of other things that escape me at the moment, but there's
But doing
many
something
things.
together.
Yeah, working on a short-term project together that can create even more exposure and more engagement in your target language with your children, and enrich your relationship, particularly again as they get older, when you have less time with them. So those experiences with my son were just so valuable. And I imagine, in the future, when he looks back and picks up these coloring books and the wordless picture book that we created together, I imagine he'll really have fond memories of of those
Yeah.
times, right?
It's a very important point you're making about doing something together. Like it's good, like as parents and like to create a bond with our children in general, but especially for multilingual families, it can really enhance the way our children speak our languages. So it's so important to do something together.
Yeah,
And so now I want to talk about a book that maybe less people know because we know about your books for adults, for parents, the books
right.
for younger children, like the coloring books, etc. But also you have written uh, this novel, which is How I Lost My Ear,
Yeah,
which is a very funny book. It's quite it's quite consequent, but there are lots of illustrations inside.
yes,
And so it's a book also that won awards, two awards in 2019. I believe you were finalist for the Reader's Favorites at the International Book Award contest and the IAN Book of the Year award. So you got these two for this book. And there is one, I would like to start maybe with one little thing that I saw at the bottom here. It says age 8 and up to read alone and or read aloud. And I really like the fact that you added this read aloud because like for like you said, for younger children, or for, not in general, like they can understand better what they hear than what they read. Uh,
mm.
and so it gives them access to a whole new type of books and give them a taste for reading this book. Do you want to give us to tell us a word about this book? So what is the story about?
And so, anyway, the project really began many years ago when I really enjoy Roald Dahl's work,
Yeah,
and I don't like everything about it,
sounds
but
a bit like it.
I really enjoy the lively humor and action of his books. And so I really wanted to write something like that and something that had that sort of comic spirit. And the book took, I would say, probably 10 years to write, but I wasn't working on it continuously. I would write for a couple of years on it and give up, and then write another year and then give up. It was really kind of, it turned into a bigger project than I expected. It's not hard to read, really, and there are a lot of illustrations, something like 140 illustrations. It's probably as long in terms of its word count as like the first Harry Potter book, something like that. So it really is manageable, even though the way it's put together looks bigger, as you were showing, because I wanted it to be suitable for read aloud, because I think it really can make a really fun and engaging read aloud book,
Yeah.
not only with the story, but with all the illustrations. And the illustrator did such a marvelous job bringing it to life. He did so much more than I could really have ever hoped for.
Show a few examples at the same time as you're talking, but
Yeah, he did such a marvelous job with the illustrations to bring it to life. So it was really, I didn't know if I would ever finish it. Like I said, it took about 10 years to finally complete. But when I finally got there, and it felt like organically over time, all the different threads of the story finally came together and really held together at the end, then I felt like I had something. And it was something I had always wanted to do and complete. And I was really happy that I was finally able to complete it. And the response from the public and from reviewers has been so positive. So that's, as I mentioned before, I also have other writing interests. And so I, may get back to that sort of writing eventually. But since the book came out, I actually have been working on a couple things, but like How I Lost My Ear, it's in fits and starts. I work on it for a while and then set it down, get frustrated and set it down, and then pick it back up eventually. So, eventually, hopefully I can finish some of these other projects as well.
Yeah, yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks.
And so we're going to get close to the end of this interview, but so you have given loads of advice. Could you summarize and maybe pick like two, three that you feel are the most important to keep in mind to keep us going? So not necessarily tips on how to do things, but tips on how to think about our journey, multilingual journey with our children.
Yeah, there's a variety of things we can talk about, of course. I really would go back to what we've touched on this a few times, but I'll try to put a shiny bow on it right now. The idea that when our children are young, when our children are young, we really should make the most of that opportunity in terms of our time with them and our influence. Because when they do get older and they get into middle school, junior high school, we just don't have as much time with them. This is probably universal for the most part. There may be exceptions. But as children get older, they get busier, they have their own friends, they don't want to spend as much time with their parents,
Yeah.
and we just don't have as much time with them, and we just don't have as much influence. So the more we can do when they're young, the more we can be mindful and proactive during those younger years, the better. The better for their language development and their progress, and the better for our relationship with them. Because as I said before, I've been able, thankfully, to maintain positive relationships with my kids now that they're older. And I think at least some part of that is because I did spend as much time with them as I could doing enjoyable things together when they were younger. So I think that's a really key point for many of the parents that are really immersed in this experience right now, because of course they tend to have younger kids. So I would really emphasize the idea: spend time with your kids as much as you can, both for their language development and moreover for your relationship with them, because when they get older, barring another pandemic, you may not have the opportunity to spend as much time with them as you did when they were younger. So keep that in mind as you move forward.
Thank you very much for this advice. And just to finish, so at the beginning, we mentioned that you were at the one creating a mastermind. So all the other links are going to be in the description below. But for the mastermind, do you want to give us a little insight or tell us a bit more about what it's going to be, what it's going to look like?
Yeah, well, first, I would really encourage people to take advantage of my first free webinar, right? So take a look at that. It's about 20 minutes, and I think it'll really give you a good sense of where I'm headed with this masterclass, which will come out in January. So first, take a look at the webinar and let me know what you think. If you want to offer some feedback, I'd love to hear from you. And then the masterclass itself, the way I describe it in the webinar actually is that in terms of, with the emphasis on getting our children to use the minority language more actively as possible, right? That's what we want. To use and to speak the minority language actively. And so the webinar is about that, but it's more like a slice of cake, right? And the masterclass is like the whole cake. And so the first is the slice, and then if you're interested in the masterclass and getting more of that cake, then please join me for the masterclass as well, where I'll offer everything I can in terms of ideas and inspiration for that challenge, which is widespread in terms of really generating more exposure, more engagement, and more willingness and more ability for the child to be able to use the target language more actively. So that's really the focus of the masterclass. But it really cuts to the heart of this experience for so many of us in terms of our desire for our children to use that language, whether it's the heritage language, or a second language, a language that we love, that we want them to use that language more actively with us and with grandparents and with others. And the master class will help you do that.
Yeah, that looks fantastic. So we're going to leave the link to the webinar in the description. I guess in the webinar, you have a link to the masterclass.
Yeah, the information is there as well.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much again for your time. And I know it's late for you in Japan, so I wish you a good night. And to all our viewers, so make sure you go and watch the other interviews with researchers and different experts we've had during this event. Thank you very much again, Adam.
Yoshito, thank you. It was really a pleasure, and I look forward to our next chance to speak together. And good
Me
luck with
too.
everything. You're doing great work.
Thank you very much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye.
Bye for now.